Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. What's going on?
Nice to see you, Mr. Mark Hand.
You too, Mr. Randy Flood. How's it going?
I love the gravy fries.
I thought I'd represent a little thing here.
All right. So my name is Randy Flood. I am a West Coast real estate broker in the Sun Valley resort town in Idaho. Sun Valley was known for being one of the first ski resorts in the United States, and it is a pretty unique area. We have a lot of the Southern California and Seattle market that come and have second homes in our marketplace. It's a difficult place to get to, but it's a little bit of a representation for the ski resorts in the West, and that conversation will trend, and we'll talk about that. So if you ever have any questions about the Sun Valley market, I would love to help you answer any of your questions. Mark, can you tell us about your real estate brokerage and your history?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in the Boston area. The team is called Landmark Property Group, and we're at Compass, which is a company that's only been around, I don't know, 7 or 8 years now. We joined in late 2018. And so we service the areas that we service, mostly greater Boston, but also in the South Shore where I live in Duxbury. We typically service all types of properties in all types of price ranges. I think our niche sometimes up in the greater Boston area tends to be new construction, condo conversion, turning a triple decker, which there's a lot of them in Boston, into condominiums, helping developers get through that process, all phases of that, and then making sure we can sell them on the back end to new homeowners and owner occupants. But we do all sorts of stuff, and I would say it's kind of cool because our markets are very different. And I actually wanted to have this conversation because as I was looking at your website and checking out that place on the front of your website is incredible, by the way. So I want to.
Yeah, that's not bad, right?
So so I'm curious anyways about the type of inventory, the type of real estate that you sell generally, I'm sure it ranges, and then maybe a little bit about that listing because I'm just interested.
Yeah, so my background was commercial real estate from San Francisco when I lived there for 10 years selling apartment buildings. And then I transitioned, moving back to my hometown, and I looked at the inventory and I looked at where I could help people out, and I saw that there was a niche in the residential market, just because there wasn't enough volume to do apartments in our market area. Sun Valley and Blaine County in general is about 22,000 people. So the residential, single family, and condominium townhome market, as well as vacant land, is kind of a specialty that I tend to spend my time understanding and trying to provide counsel for people.
Yep.
Sun Valley is unique in the standpoint that it attracts a lot of affluent people, a lot of second homes, and there is a smaller economic engine in the Sun Valley market, much like there is to a degree a huge service industry. A large percentage of our marketplace is construction, just as far as the economic hub. And then you have a lot of wealthy people who have made money elsewhere and have brought that wealth to the marketplace.
Yeah,
and so it's really,
hospitality is a big thing, right?
Hospitality is a big thing. I do think that we can kind of get into that discussion about where we see this market going. But hopefully that gives you a nutshell. That particular property you were talking about is 205-acre property contiguous to Bald Mountain, which is kind of unheard of in the West. And it's a beautiful 4,800 square foot home, basically on top of the mountain. So
is that your exclusive listing? Are you showing that to people?
It is, yeah. It's pretty a neat story. When you look at the lineage of ownership, it's basically an old mining claim from the 1800s. So the when the West was expanded and you were allowed to kind of stake claim on federal grounds for mining, it's an old mining claim that was converted to somebody else in 1990. It's just a unique property. And
Look, it looks like a hotel. When you look at the aerial shots, it looks like it's like a ski lodge on the side of the mountain.
it does look like that, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So it's an interesting place. And, you know, when we start talking about what's been happening in our marketplace in the pandemic and how businesses are, why don't you lead us into kind of what you're seeing in the greater Boston area for how your business is and what you're seeing more about the trends of what people are doing from
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
high level and specific. So in, I'd say mid-March, I think as far as our area goes, and I don't know exactly when it kind of hit you guys, if it was earlier than that or later than that, but right around St. Patrick's Day, we started to get an inkling of this was happening. And I think very soon after that, most of activity, real estate wise, shut down or paused at least. Initially, I got to be honest that when people said, "Oh, this is a big thing. It's going to be a huge thing," and my initial reaction was completely wrong. I said, "No, this is going to be like 2, 3, 4 weeks, and we'll recover and we'll have a spring market." I couldn't have been farther from. I was dead wrong, and yeah, it completely shut everything down. In Massachusetts, we're still considered essential workers, so the governor is allowing real estate to happen. So we're still doing it, but honestly, between mid-March and towards the end of April, there wasn't much going on, no matter what really people were saying. There was a few things happening. We did have some closings and stuff that were slated to close, but we also had things fall apart, and pretty much everyone crawled into their house and bunkered up. So I think on May 1st, towards the end of April, right around May 1st is when I started to see things really revive. And right now, a lot of it is weather related, I think. As the temperature gets warmer, April was an awful weather month around here. So I think May started off with a little sunny days, and I think people started to realize we can get through it, and they're out like gangbusters right now. We've put properties under agreement, a few of them in the last week or so, and people are chomping at the bit to get out and see things. So right now it's looking like we're not going to see tremendous dips in values and pricing and things like that. That may change in a couple months. We may be looking back and go, "Oh, we misread it again." I don't know, but that's kind of that's the mindset of most buyers and sellers around here. Yeah, so we basically spent the time preparing things, getting things photographed safely, preparing marketing for listings that we were slated to put out there, in the spring. And in the last 10 days or so, we started releasing some of that inventory out, and it's getting good responses. So in general, we're on a good trend. Hopefully that continues through the summer months. I think the spring pretty much is going to move to the summer, May, June, July, and August, and we'll see what the fall brings. How about you?
So in our marketplace, people have been trying to understand what's going to happen. We have had inventory shortages probably the last couple of quarters. And for example, in the entire market for under $1 million, we had before the pandemic hit our area, I think we had 55 single family homes under $1 million in the marketplace. That has increased to maybe 62 homes, $1 million. So there's really only 3 months of inventory in our marketplace. And the buyer that's buying a $350,000 home, is not the same buyer buying a $975,000 home. So there's not a whole lot of inventory in each of the tiers up 100,000 in that marketplace for single family.
Yep.
The activity is similar to us. Our market had the highest per capita COVID cases in the country.
Yeah, I heard that.
I think it was interesting, and a lot of that is we're a small marketplace, and you see people frequently. My wife potentially had she definitely tested positive. She probably got it from hockey, and hopefully the silver lining in that discussion is that if the herd immunity occurs, the local I think we had 500 cases or 496 cases. And so there's probably 2,000 to 3,000 people that have possibly had the infection of the virus, and hopefully that, and if we're talking 3,000 people, that's out of 22,000 people, that's a pretty good percentage of the population.
It is. You said your wife had it, and you had it too, probably, right?
I never tested myself, but lost the sense of smell.
Yeah. And how can you explain? Like, a lot of people, hear through different people, but like you actually probably had it in your house. Like, what was it like?
Yeah, so pretty benign in our scenario. So if you didn't realize there was a pandemic going on, you were like, hey, should I really treat this seriously? And I can understand so many people having asymptomatic symptoms because, we didn't really have too much of a bump in our own household. And if we didn't have an understanding of what was going on globally, you would have just thought, oh, yeah, not a big deal at all.
Right.
And it is interesting to see mindset of, in our market, we have an older affluence, and, Sun Valley, some of the quotes and the jokes, it's where old people go to ski with their parents. So it's a older demographic. And, when you look at the virus and who it affects, it's certainly, we have that aging demographic, and
yeah.
It's pretty disheartening to see, some of the folks that were 90 years old, they were still skiing top to bottom, which is 3,000 feet. And
Yeah.
the virus came, and, unfortunately I had one friend whose father died, and 90 years old. And we didn't have a huge number of deaths. I think we've had 8 deaths. But it didn't overwhelm our healthcare system to the degree that, our aging demographic could have really dealt with. So I think our local community shut down around the 14th of March. And I think that was a couple of days before St. Patrick's Day. And as a result, most of the events that we have seen have been canceled and are kind of canceled throughout the summer. And I think that's just everywhere that we're seeing. But one of the things I will say about Sun Valley is the quality of life probably has potentially almost improved. Obviously, there's some families that have lost loved ones or have dealt with parents that have been in the ICU. But when you kind of look at our map here, in the outdoor recreation space, can you see me okay back there?
Yeah, I can see you.
So basically, here's Sun Valley, Ketchum area.
Yep.
And it makes a pretty small chunk. And if you look at all of the recreation opportunities, you can go hiking and not see anybody for several days.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the economic drivers of why people will still want to come to a Sun Valley marketplace is because if this pandemic has several waves to it, much like the Spanish flu, sheltering in place can still occur, yet you still have the ability to safely get outside and recreate and exercise and, bird watch and walk. Versus, I think, in the metro areas, I think it becomes a lot more difficult. And I think LA has potential stay in shelter in place until August 1st, which would be pretty difficult, I think, for that urban area. And I think that, it'll be interesting to see these dynamic shifts occur. Sun Valley's or Ketchum's population doubled in 1970 when this map basically put Sawtooth National Recreation Area designated in 1970. And I think that population of Ketchum doubled that year because people wanted to be near a recreation facility. And the designation of a recreation area really helped, even more than just the ski resort of Sun Valley itself.
I'm curious, sorry to interrupt, I'm just curious if there's any possibility that mayors or town officials will have the ability to limit the use of any of that recreational stuff, the parks, national parks, I think, are closed right now. Maybe they have plans to reopen, but like, is there any worry that they can actually constrict any of that activity, or do you think that's not likely? I mean, no, there's a lot of land there.
Yeah, so it would I mean, there's several different entities you'd be dealing with. You'd be dealing with Sawtooth National Recreation Area, which has within it wilderness. Then you have Bureau of Land Management. Then you also have the National Forest. And you haven't seen any of those entities shut their gates or shut down recreation opportunities.
Yep.
From a local municipality perspective, what we have seen closed are like the skate parks. That was closed. They're reopened now. I think hockey rinks, that obviously shut down just because you're kind of indoors in a confined space.
Yep.
But the local entities do not have the ability to shut down BLM or National Forest. So that goes back to the federal level, and I don't foresee that being a possibility. And really, if you have 22,000 people and 300,000, 400,000 or 500,000, acres of land, the per square mile, per capita per square mile is pretty minimal. So you can still recreate, and on a 5-mile hiking loop, if you see one person, all you have to do is step off the trail and keep your distance of 6 feet apart.
Yeah, you might see a little increase in the amount of buyers giving you calls over the next few months, people from LA and stuff like that. Have you already noticed a little bump in people just wanting to get out of the urban setting and get out there?
Yeah, I think that usually in a ski resort town, you have slack that kind of occurs, but there are bodies who have second homes here, and they've just decided to come here because while this is has been a hot spot for the COVID virus, you can safely still get your food delivered, and
in your own house.
Yep. And you have your own house, which, the minimum size outside of the city of Haley and the city of Ketchum, where you have sewer systems, the minimum size acreage for a septic is an acre. So most of the houses that you have plenty of room to plant your garden. And it's, certainly been a lot of people planting their gardens. And, I think it's interesting to talk with people about how well the lawn and garden businesses have done from the purchase of seed and people
really
getting into their own backyards.
Yeah, maybe the mountain bike business too. Probably some bikes being purchased online.
There is quite a bit of bikes. I mean, I think the retail center of Sturtevant's has said they've been doing gangbusters with bike sales.
Yeah.
But it's been kind of outdoors. So you have other businesses like in Sun Valley Resort, which, a lot of their retail clientele was from conventions and from organizations. And they had a big bike inventory rental pool. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But, in our line of business, which is, to a degree, a large percentage is the residential home.
Yep.
It'll be interesting just to see how resilient that market is in this time period. So, in the jumbo loan market of Sun Valley for the last year, 50% of the properties above 600,000 have had loans. The other 50% have been cash.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at like studies of CoreLogic, the loans that have occurred, I think 35% or more of the loans have 50% or more equity in position when you look at some of those data trends from CoreLogic. So, foreclosures are certainly a risk in every market, and we were hit really hard in the 2008, 2009 timeframe.
Yep.
But I think the fundamentals of what happened in that financial crisis are a little bit different, not entirely different, but it's a little bit different because everyone thinks that the foreclosure market is going to ramp up in our marketplace and in our area.
Yep.
And there's no indication that there's an increase in default notices that have occurred yet.
Yeah.
Obviously, in every market, there's some, and one of my expertise has been in dealing with the distressed assets,
Yeah.
and it made a large portion of the marketplace back in 2008 and 2009, 10, and 12.
Yeah.
There's only one bank-owned market on the marketplace right now, and that's a 14,000 square foot listing that I have, and it's just a big home that is
How much is that
about
for?
the trend.
What does that sell for?
That's listed at 2.3,
Yep.
and so one of the better prices per square foot.
Geez, 14,000 square foot home for 2.3.
Yeah,
And how many acres?
it sits on 4.8.
Nice.
I mean, it's a value play, but it's a lot of home. I mean, do you need 11 bedrooms? I don't know if many people need 11 bedrooms right now, especially in this pandemic. But
Yeah.
there's a buyer out there for it. And that was one of the transactions that maybe fell apart for me. That was in contract, and then it kind of the buyer terminated that. And that's kind of when the stock market was just starting to slide on March 14th.
Right. Yeah. When just to switch gears about like other home stuff, home life, how is it going with schooling, homeschooling, managing the house, all that stuff? Because a lot of people are stuck in their house. I'm just curious, how's it going in your neck of the woods?
Well, certainly the new trampoline pad, because I think we ripped our thing that had open tore, and so we had ordered a new one, and we're thankfully able to get one. But it's been nice having two kids because they have lots of energy and they've been running around with each other pretty well.
Two boys, right?
Two boys, yeah. They're 11 and 8. I am board chairman for Syringa Mountain School, which is a Waldorf-inspired charter school here in our local area. And I have to give the teachers just major credit for being innovative and really trying to bring the education to the kids with and making it fun and still making learning happening. So, certainly when you're trying to work your work and you're also trying to get your kid, on the Zoom call, it's been very chaotic, I think, for a lot of parents, and certainly was for me. Once we've settled into a groove and a rhythm, it's been a nice, consistent trend for a schedule for what the kids are doing.
Yeah.
And they've enjoyed it. And our enrollment has actually increased over the pandemic, partially because our teachers at Syringa Mountain School have been very innovative and active. And a few other parents have seen this kind of quality. So it's been pretty good. And, I imagine though I imagine it is a lot more different for somebody that is living in four walls without any space to let the energy of kids bubble out and over.
Yeah, there's been a lot of data that we've, come across in the last few weeks that people are doing searches. Primarily, the big jumps for searching for houses is single families, houses with more space, indoor and outdoor, yards, swimming pools. I think it's tripled. The amount of searches on our website is tripled. So I think there's a definite possibility that the people that are in the urban settings in Boston are looking around in the last 5 weeks going, what are we doing? We're spending, because the money is big in Boston. There's not a lot of land, and there's a lot of great condos and single families. So people pay up to live there, but if they don't have that space and they have a kid or two, or even if they don't have a kid, I think they're realizing, we should probably get a little more space. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the suburbs that are just outside the metropolitan areas, like, that still offer some convenience and not a huge commute, but can give little space and yard, I think those are going to be a beneficial, those towns are going to benefit big time, I think, over the
No,
next.
I think one of my friends who I play hockey with, we were talking about New York, and what you saw in the 2008 2009 financial crisis is um, a flock to the urban centers, and San Francisco rents went up in that time period. It was like interesting. The suburbia kind of has had this trend of a dying kind of desire. And I
Yep.
do think that, in some of those markets like Greenwich, Connecticut, and a lot of the areas outside of New York City,
Hmm.
uh, I think he was telling me stories where sight unseen, renting a house, single family, just to a lot of the wealth, trying to find some sort of more elbow room, if you would,
Yep.
uh, because it is pretty difficult to be in a high-rise building, I imagine, and not have the ability to leave it.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Hamptons has seen a huge increase in activity. People renting sight unseen, anything with a little space and maybe a pool. People are trying to get it from, anywhere from March, April, all the way through till September, where they would normally come down for, maybe 2 weeks or a month or maybe the summer. They want these 5-month rentals, 6-month rentals, or even more. And it's creating quite a, from the Compass agents that I talked to in New York, it's a little bit of a bottleneck. Some of the locals that are in the Hamptons are, they're not overly excited that the hotspot of New York City is now funneling down into the Hamptons for 6 months because they're nervous about the rates of the disease and all that stuff. So it's interesting to see.
It much like surfing and localism, there is unfortunately some prejudice that is going to occur throughout the country. And I've heard of, um, you know, the typical license plate here is 5B for Blaine County.
Yep.
And you travel out of county for services that might not be here or potentially recreation opportunities. And there is a little bit of turning of the nose, much like you're talking about in the Hamptons with
Yeah.
quote unquote outsiders.
Yeah.
And in our marketplace, which caters to tourism, the Sun Valley um, alliance was kind of early on just saying stay at home, dealing with the pandemic. And obviously that's what many resorts were doing, and a lot of the reasons why the ski resorts shut down throughout the country relatively quick is this fear of the pandemic infecting more people, right? And I think that we're dealing with an interesting aspect where we have had a high concentration rate. My feeling here is that there is going to, and I guess let me segue here. A lot of the buyers in our marketplace are secondary home buyers who utilize VRBO vacation rentals to augment their expense.
Sure.
And I do think that has created a housing crunch from a rental standpoint. Many of the major ski resort markets, Jackson Hole, Park City, all deal with affordable housing for the service industry because a lot of that inventory is tied up in the Airbnb, VRBO market. And I think Jackson Hole has even gone so far to limit over the last couple of years how you can rent out a property short term from a municipality standpoint. And I think that's the same thing in the Hamptons. And so one of the things I think this will do is that it'll create some rental market inventory that allows affordability for the service industry. There's going to be a little bit of a shakeup from a standpoint of, do people really need to hold on to their second home or their second condo,
Hmm.
or will they convert that to a long-term rental? So I think as you look at the hotel luxury, the hotel and the hospitality industry, those convention type assets will certainly see a little bit of a slowdown in their bookings. And I think you will see a little bit of a slowdown in the bookings, but I think Sun Valley in general, because of the recreation opportunities, is still going to have a lot of demand, much like the Southamptons, for rentals. And eventually rentals always convert into purchases. Um, you know, I just think I think it occurs.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot of shifts, and I think that's pretty smart to make some guesses. I think it's probably likely what you said, and I'm curious what's going to happen in the fall and even next winter with schools and with ski resorts. I mean, if this thing swings back around, there's a very good chance that these schools will not resume the way we think they will, or that they should. Maybe, I've heard everything from outdoor learning to, 2 days in, 2 days out, or two days home, 3 days in, just to kind of lessen the numbers in the classrooms. But I can tell you what, from a parent standpoint, if that happens and we have to, be teaching our kids and working and managing life from this past March until next Christmas, it's gonna be interesting. Let's say that.
Yeah, no, it is. In the two working parents in a family, that is certainly a conversation. And will we see a trend nationally that we go to more of a one spouse procuring the income,
Yeah.
and the role of the stay-at-home parent increasing just because you have to deal with the demands of staying at home with the kids, right? I think there's school, like, I think as a nation, everyone is thankful for the school systems and teachers. And I think there's a huge, like, much of your grocery workers.
Thank you, teachers.
I think that
we miss you.
Yeah, it's really important to recognize that a segment of our society is really indebted, and we've taken for granted probably as a society, the grocery workers and teachers and some of the people that maybe are slugging it in and day out and providing these services to our family that are huge, like the food system, the education system. Thank you for everyone who works in those industries.
Yeah, they're taking care of the most important thing, which is our kids.
Yeah. And so what will school look like? I mean, from being on the board, Idaho has, in 2006, Idaho converted from a property tax, statewide property tax to fund schools, to a sales tax. And so, from a budgetary standpoint, what we'll see in Idaho is that the governor has kind of said that the budgets will be reduced for state funding for the schools by 5%. And part of that is because the governor, in 2006, when they converted from property tax base to a sales tax base, it created a situation where we are exposed to the incomes of the state of Idaho. It certainly alleviated some of the people who own property, but when you look at a stable funding source for schools, going back to property tax base for funding of schools is probably a good way to get back to create stability for at least one of the bigger assets, which is schools in everyone's life.
Yeah, I would imagine all over the place they're looking at budgets and seeing where the budgets are going and where they're deriving income from, and there might be a big shift in all that.
Yeah, and so that's just the nuances of what we're dealing with. But I think that, I think Blaine County School District, which is a different school district than our small little Syringa school, and our Syringa school is only 120 kids, so it's a pretty small K through 8 school system. Yep. The Blaine County school system is 3,000 kids, and they have a 127-page manual where they're trying to figure out, it's a rolling component of how you try to figure out, because I do think schools are a vector for exposure to viruses, just because there's quality. But the outdoor learning is pretty impressive, because the fundamentals of like a Waldorf education is going outside, looking at how, birds nest, looking at how plants grow, and you can still have an education with teacher having time with the kids outdoors.
Yep.
and not necessarily in the classroom setting because it's more hands-on learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those kind of alternative classrooms are probably shining through right now as beacons for a lot of these people that may be asking themselves if their kids are in the right school settings and they're looking at these alternative places that do what you just said, which is spend time on not just reading and writing, but some of the other stuff that's important.
Yeah, and it's learning can occur in multiple different environments, but I do think that the school systems need to really help in getting all of the people back to work and driving our economy.
Big time. Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, I think we nailed it.
It's been really good talking to you. And did you ever buy a mountain bike?
I did not buy a mountain bike yet, but I'm basically shopping right now. I just got to justify spending the money, and I can't really spend any money right now because I got to make sure I can sell some more houses before I do it.
Yeah. Well, the difference between a 27.5 and a 29, like, because you're doing a lot of your mountain biking in around Burke Mountain in Vermont, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's exactly. I haven't even done any yet, but that's the hope.
Yeah. And so the 29 rolls over rocks a little bit better.
I'm just going to get it. Oh, you like the 27.5, right?
I like the 27.5.
Hmm.
And then I also like aluminum over carbon. And
why is that?
aluminum,
It's a little sturdier for like a bigger guy. Come here, Brooks. Brooks, come here.
yeah.
Brooks, come here. I want you to meet my dog too. He's in here. I'm going to bring him in. But keep going. What is the aluminum versus the carbon? This is real.
So the aluminum of, like, you roll a rock into your, frame, it might ding the aluminum frame.
Yep.
And certainly aluminum is, heavier, but it has a little bit more resilience in braking. When you look at, like, where the packaging is for the frame, the components of, just tight. You roll rocks into your frame and you chip a carbon frame. It's plastic and it's easy to destroy a frame pretty easy.
Well, it's also like a lot less for the aluminum, so I think I'll be an aluminum guy just because the carbon is like huge money.
Yeah, but the trend for mountain biking is that a lot of the companies were going into the carbon production.
Yep.
And I think, I'm not exactly sure why, but I've enjoyed my top of the line aluminum $3,000 bike, and it's fun. Look at your little dog.
This is Brooks.
Hi, Brooks.
Say hi, Brooks. He's a good dog, but man, they require a lot, these puppies. Holy cow. Woo, I'm exhausted. He's like a therapy dog. We got him right before this whole went down, and he's been awesome. The kids love him. He's great, but he definitely requires a lot. He's got FOMO. He wants to be part of everything.
Well, Mark, it's been really good catching up with you and hearing about your business. And I think
Randy.
you need to just kind of learn from my longtime friends.
Yeah, me too. And I would like to send a buyer to that ranch on the side of the mountain to buy a 200-acre property so I can go have a cocktail on the patio.
Yeah, and you can get that right here if you click on this link.
Right, click. All right, later, dude.
Peace out. Talk to you later, Mark. Thanks. Bye.